video chat is ready to begin.
Hey everybody, welcome to the CISO series video chat. My name is David Spark. I am your host, not your producer. The producer is Andrew. He's in the background. He's going to be making sure everything is working perfectly today for all of you. And let me go through the mechanics of what's happening on today's video chat. For those of you who are regulars, of which I see many regulars here today, thank you very much for coming in. Ooh, I got to the beginning of my presentation. Here it's the start of it. It is hacking fraud as our topic. So what we want is we want bad ideas on fraud. I will say it again.
Send them in. We need your bad ideas. Send them in.
Whoops.
We need...
That's too many times I wanted to say that. That is our topic today, hacking fraud, and an hour of critical thinking on identifying fraud's variances and creating roadblocks to thwart it. So our two guests, the one that looks like Santa Claus that Larry pointed out, that's Dan Woods. And by the way, he hears that daily, he says. He is the VP of the Shape Intelligence Center at F5. And also joining us with the other beard, not as Santa-like, is Matt Krause, the CISO of Taco Bell. We still like Matt as well. All right. Now, here's the thing. We're going to be talking about fraud. I'm going to also throw out to you, do you have stories of fraud? You can share them in the chat, but also please contact me. I am working on a big story about fraud. I would love to quote you and your story about fraud as well. So please contact me. I want to hear it. So David at CISOseries.com. We are sponsored by F5. All right. For those of you who are old hats, have been here a while, feel free to take a snooze for a second. 5 different ways to participate. The chat room, you've probably figured that out already. 2, submit bad ideas. You can also vote for your favorite. That'll happen in 20 minutes past the hour. But submit bad ideas on the premise of hacking fraud. So bad ideas around fraud, how to, quote, manage fraud. Your bad way of handling that. Because we will play later 2 games, Beat the Bad Idea and What's Worse. If you want to join us on video, you can do that anytime by just saying, bring me on. If you got a question or a comment, we can handle that. You can ask a question at any time as well, or vote for your favorite question, because sometimes we get a lot of them. I don't know which one to ask first. And if you vote them up, then I will look at that one first. All right. This is a schedule. Questions. I'll ask them. You'll ask them. Somebody will ask them. We put the poll live 20 minutes past the hour of your bad ideas. You then vote for your favorite bad idea. At 30 minutes past the hour, we will play Beat the Bad Idea. So can you come up with a bad idea so bad that you don't think either Matt or Dan can think of any control to stop it? Because that's the idea on Beat the Bad Idea. Then you'll vote for your favorite questions. You can do that at the beginning as well. Also, our winner from last week of the Beat the Bad Idea, or excuse me, of our winner last week of just the best bad idea was Sean Bowen, the CISO over at RBI. He will come on and play the What's Worse game with our 2 guests. After that, we will have the last question advice. And then at the end of the hour, we will provide the link for the icebreaker. If you've never participated in the icebreaker, you are missing out. So do not miss out. Stick around for that. A fun series of one-on-one meetings. You will like that. All right, next Friday, I also want to just mention our next Friday, our video chat is Hacking Systemic Risk. This is not going to be about cyber risk. It's about systemic and cognitive risk, too, for that matter. This will be a fascinating discussion. The link at the bottom of the screen is to register for just that. All right, with that being said, I got through all of that. Let's start. Let's begin with our questions. I'm going to throw out I'll start with you, Dan, because this discussion started with you, and that had to do with the fact that fraud, when we normally think about it, we think financial fraud through like a phishing example, but fraud comes in many, many different forms. So just set us up in like all the different ways we should be thinking about fraud.
Well, I think too often people associate some sort of financial loss with fraud, and unfortunately, that's a bit too narrow. In all the years I've been investigating fraud in law enforcement, it wasn't necessarily about financial loss. It was using, a deceit to advance some objective, with the final goal of perhaps monetary or an intelligence gathering gain. You don't actually have to get the money. You just have to try. And hopefully, people like us and the people on the call are the people who will stop them and help them fail at that effort.
All right. Now, I'm going to throw this to you, Mr. Matt Krause. Are you sort of on the lookout and aware of the variances in fraud?
Oh, of course. We're on the lookout for fraud all the time. I mean, being a large retailer with a large presence physically and a very large presence digitally as well, being on the lookout for fraud is a key part of the role, for sure.
Right, but in terms of like the variances, if you will, like it's not just the, hey, watch out for a phishing email and somebody asking you to buy a bunch of gift cards, like, which is like the most common story we keep hearing. Like, what are sort of ways you've seen it and ways you sort of alerted others to this as well?
Yeah, being on the lookout, it's not always credit card fraud. It's not always business email compromise. It's not always financially motivated, even. I mean, fraud can take the form of, like Dan mentioned, information or data, but also just access. And we've seen people attempting just to gain persistent access with the intent of reselling that access to some other bad actor. So you kind of have to be on the lookout all around and, in every different dimension for it.
And Dan, one of the concerns I know that you had, that you saw all the time, and Matt, you can speak to it of what you've seen historically as well, but the fraud department of a company and the cybersecurity department often are not operating in unison, or often the opposite of that. What are you seeing?
Yeah, that is absolutely right. Sadly, I'll go meet with the security team and tell them about some sort of an attack and explain why the fraud team should be involved. And oftentimes the security team will just say, no, we don't need them. And I'm thinking, what kind of a siloed operation is this? And then other times I tell them that, look, fraud should know about this. And they say, just a minute. And they call fraud to join the meeting. And the latter is obviously the way to go. It's the idea that fraud and security can operate independently is just a dated idea that I don't know. I actually don't know where it got its momentum to begin with. It's just a failed idea.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that, Dan, because in every role that I've ever been in, I've worked really closely with the fraud teams. And I mean,
So
we usually call them loss prevention in retail, but for lots of reasons. They're sometimes our very best partners. And
so
I find
tell us how that plays itself out, Matt, and why that's worked well.
Yeah, it's worked really well because I think number one, security and fraud are kind of the head and tail of the snake, right? And I'm not going to say which is the head and which is the tail, but we definitely work together to make this animal move forward. The fraud teams typically have two numbers on speed dial. They'll have a number to the bank and they'll have a number to law enforcement. And I have those numbers too, but as the CISO, if there's some kind of fraud event going on, I've got all kinds of fires going on and I'm trying to triage and I'm trying to run forensics and I'm trying to communicate up. And it's really helpful if I have a partner who already has a really solid existing relationship with my financial backers and with my law enforcement partners to work hand in hand with them and allow them to tag team run off. I'll report out to you and you kind of run that part of the show. It's certainly not the only reason that they're beneficial or helpful. I just view us all as achieving the same goal, just with slightly different specialties inside of it.
Yeah, I have a specific example, gift card tracking. Okay, you have fraud teams who are worried about the loss of these gift card from customer accounts, but security, they've got bots hitting the check gift card balance endpoint, trying to enumerate valid gift card numbers and PINs, and it even involves loss prevention, physical loss prevention in the stores. They need to be aware that a couple of people loitering around a gift card rack taking pictures of the backs of gift cards is a precursor to an attack against the check gift card balance. So here you have one type of fraud, and that is gift card cracking, and it involves security, involves fraud, and it involves physical loss prevention in the retail stores.
Now, I don't know if you saw this, Matt, but Sean Bone, who's essentially at a competitor, he's a CISO over at Burger King. He just called fraud a snake's ass.
Yeah, and I kind of figured Sean would call me out on that. I was a little reluctant to drop that one out there, but good catch, Sean. Not always true, by the way.
So, all right. So Let me ask, a question came in from Mike Wilkes. I saw actually now a ton of questions are coming in right now. And I think, Dan, you might be in best position to answer this because I believe you're kind of watching this pretty closely over at the Shape Center over at F5. He's asking, is fraud on the increase over the last 5 years? And if so, by what measure? So I'm interested, like, are you measuring fraud and what do you see? If so, what are you seeing in terms of that measurement?
Oh, wow, that's a pretty loaded question. I think fraud seems to be always on the rise. The fraudsters are coming up with new and creative ways to monetize various forms of assets. I mean, one thing I'd say is we talk to some enterprises and they say, look, there's really nothing inside our accounts except PII, so we're not really too worried about. There's no gift cards, there's no stored value, nothing, no loyalty points, no frequent flyer miles, nothing, just PII. And they don't realize that PII all by itself plays a very important role in social engineering and really complex fraud schemes. So that's what I'm seeing an increase in, where it isn't just about ATO and monetization of assets. It's also about really complex, multi-staged social engineering schemes that are fueled by PII. So I see a lot, quite an increase in that.
This was an interesting question for you, Matt, specifically. Does the QSR, quick service restaurant space, have unique fraud concerns, or are they most across the board of industries? Do you find something that's unique to your industry in terms of fraud?
Unique to QSR, actually, I would say we really did, especially during the very beginnings of COVID, when things were shut down, everybody was quarantined, there were long lines and outages at the grocery stores, et cetera, but everybody knew that they could still get food at a Taco Bell or a Burger King or wherever, and drive-throughs as essential operators, we were still able to be open. So uniquely to the QSR space, I think we saw a really big uptick in account takeover attempts, credential stuffing type fraud, for people who were just trying to resell that because they knew they could get a premium for e-commerce type accounts, especially for food during those times.
One of our QSR partners was experiencing some pain due to kind of a creative fraud scheme. What happened is the fraudster would have a stolen credit card and was looking for a way to monetize that stolen credit card. And, rather than going to a retailer and buying a flat screen TV and then reselling it, what he would do is order food from the QSR, thousands of dollars worth of food, like a catering order, and then would tip a very large amount to the driver of the food delivery service. So they had quite a scam going. A couple of multi-$1,000 orders with $800 tips. You put 5 of those together in a day, and you start to make some serious money.
Wow. That's it. So, by the way, that's an amazing fraud story. I am very interested in your fraud. Your fraud stories. I just put my email address there. I am working on this big project separate from this video chat. So please if you've got one, just make a note to yourself, like follow up with Dave with my fraud story. And it can be any kind, because as you mentioned, Dan, fraud is usually just a means to an end, that you are often not the intended victim. But if you are the one sort of handling cash transactions, you're often the intended victim. Matt, have you seen situations where you're not the intended victim, but you were a tool used in a fraud scheme?
We've not seen that on our side. We're typically the end target,
right.
But I have definitely been on the receiving end of that and traced things back through.
And can you give us an example of like how that manifests itself?
Oh, sure. I mean, we see bot attacks all the time, and when we start to trace those bot attacks back, I was having an interesting conversation with somebody who was proposing hacking back. And I said, if somebody starts hacking back, they're going to start breaking people's baby monitors and thermostats because the fraud gets perpetuated through those kind of, a lot of times, IoT devices and home automation things. There's fraud there. There's fraud to take over those accounts and compromise those platforms in order to install a script or move forward and perpetuate that onto another and then another until you finally get to your target.
By the way, I like this bad idea that just came in from Tom. Change fraud department's name to Snake's Ass in an attempt to intimidate malicious actors. I don't know if that's the part of the snake that we're all afraid of, though. I think of all the parts of the snake to be scared of, the least scary part of a snake. So I don't know,
Hey,
Tom. It's not that bad of an idea.
hey,
In
David,
your
on
wisdom.
the topic of are you the intended target or just a
Yeah.
means to an end? We're seeing a lot of aggressive attacks on, say, email providers or
Hmm.
telcos, and it's not that they're suffering a monetary loss like an email provider, but when you get into somebody's inbox, then you could deduce where they likely to have online accounts. Like
Hmm.
if you get into my inbox and you see that I'm getting emails from Taco Bell, then one can surmise, hey, he probably has an account at Taco Bell. Then they
Hmm.
set up an email filter forwarder on my email, and they go through the password reset workflow at Taco Bell, and they could take over my account that way. This is manual, though, not an automated attack. And it's hard to get the email provider's attention on that because they're not suffering any loss. So one message to everybody on the call is, look, we have to kind of look at the full fraud scheme, not just the monetization step, and fight it along the entire journey.
Larry Rosen has asked me if I've ever had a snake pee or poop in my hand. Can't say can't say that I have. I don't invite it either. All right. This question is for you, Matt, because you were talking about that you have a nice joint connection with your fraud department. And Craig Herder wants to know. Craig, I might have called your last name Hunter. My apologies, and I'm sure I'm not the first one who made that stupid mistake. What is a proven method for addressing fraud from a joint cyber fraud task force perspective? Now, you talked about having essentially the speed dials ready to go, but like maybe just sort of one or two best practices that you've learned working with your fraud department that this just works well if you're doing this with fraud.
Yeah, it works well. I mean, early communication is always really important,
Hmm.
right? You get the notification in, and if it comes in through fraud or if it comes in through security, again, the two working hand in hand. If everybody knows what's going on right up front, that helps a ton. And then, what's really worked well for me in the past has been a task force,
Hmm.
right? We get people in the same room, and sometimes we get people on the same call, and those are third parties from the banks. We help to build those relationships, and that's what we really fall back on is the relationships that you're building. So if everybody has the right context, everybody knows that they're working off of the same page. If you have playbooks, you've built them together. Um, and then the reporting and the communication channels are already built. That's a proven method that I've relied on in the past, just to make sure that they know I've got their back and I know that they've got my back. And I know exactly where to find them in the middle of the night if I need to.
I would add that you also want to be proactive about a relationship with law enforcement. You don't want to wait until you're
Yeah.
compromised to call in law
Yeah.
enforcement.
That's, by the way, good general advice about law enforcement in general. Like if you know your neighborhood cop, make friends with them before you call them and complain about something. Always good idea. By the way, we are 2 minutes from the from voting for the best bad idea, and I just want to. You can't really see this, but I'm going to stand up. This, by the way, I'm wearing one of these CISO series branded sweatshirts that you can all see. This is the prize. I am physically wearing the prize one gets if they get the best bad idea. Now, by the way, you can submit bad ideas all through this hour. It doesn't need to come in the next 2 minutes to be eligible to win this sweatshirt. What happens, for those of you who don't know, all the bad ideas come in. I review them without names, so I am anonymous. I don't know who submitted them. If I do, there's a few cases where I do know, like where I yelled out Tom's one. I will get a second opinion, have them choose the bad idea because I know my opinion swayed or because I know who the winner is. But the winner is chosen, and they get a sweatshirt. And I will just say to all the past winners, I just sent out your sweatshirt, so you will be receiving them soon. I was waiting for my order to come in, and so to get it to you. So you're getting them now. All right, let's move on. There are tons of questions. There are 10 questions. I've actually answered a couple of them. So please start voting for your favorite questions. Here's one. All right. Well, I know Dan's got a good one, and we did talk about this, and I know you've got tons of stories. So I'm going to ask again. I'm sorry. Let me say who asked this question. Hold on. Let me see who asked it. This comes from Ian Pointer. What's the most imaginative fraud scheme you have ever seen? And Matt, I want you to load one up, and I want the entire audience to load one up, and also email me at david@cisoseries.com. All right, so Dan, what is the most imaginative fraud scheme you've ever seen?
Well, I guess it's the most distinctive and memorable. I don't know about imaginative, but there was one of our retail customers was having a problem with people taking over accounts and using the loyalty points in the accounts to buy cheese. And then they were selling the cheese to local restaurants, which I just seemed like such a niche type of fraud. I think we can narrow down the suspects to just those who know cheese and those who have connections in the local restaurant market. It was just an odd monetization scheme. So that one sticks out. And then I guess there's another one where someone just took PII, a criminal organization just took PII and used it to gain really misplaced credibility with the victim and convinced the victim, because they had this inside information, convinced the victims to make mortgage payments to a third party. And they actually got them, conned them out of millions of dollars, and many people lost their homes. So those are just two examples that stick out in my mind. But I'm sure if I thought about it some more over the last 25 years, there's probably some better ones.
All right, Matt, what's the most imaginative one you've seen?
The most imaginative, and it actually, depending on how you look at it, wasn't necessarily malicious, but it will always stick in my head. I heard a story once about somebody who had gotten a misdirected text message from somebody who thought they were their best friend and replied back and started texting back and forth. Anyway, he literally assumed the identity of this guy's friend through this text conversation and ended up with an invitation to the friend's wedding and went. And showed up at the wedding, and he's like, "Hey, congratulations, buddy! Don't you know me?" Not malicious fraud, but it will always stick out as just an opportunity of like verify who you're actually talking to. Ask a question once in a while that only they would know, because if you don't actually see them in person, you don't know.
That is pretty darn funny. I like that one. All right. Well, you're going to have to email me that whole story too, as well. All right. Are we at 20 minutes? Yes, the poll is up, everybody. And there were some monstrous bad ideas. There are a ton in there. By the way, you can still submit bad ideas, even though you're not in the poll right now. You can still submit bad ideas for your chance to win the awesome sweatshirt. All right. More questions have come in. Let me see. This one from Adam. Serious question. Is part of the triage gauging it's part of the triage gauging if the extent or damage is worth the engagement of the full fraud / cyber team? Oh, that is a good question right there. So, Dan, is there ever a case where you see fraud where you're like, this doesn't seem so damaging, let's move on? Or do you investigate every case?
Well, as a vendor, we're like a zero tolerance for fraud. We don't want to see any fraud, but that's true. You go to some enterprises and they have a certain threshold, and as long as it's below that threshold, then they're not going to throw any additional resources at it. What changes that whole dynamic is privacy. When you go to an enterprise and you say, look, the fraud is below a certain threshold, so we don't care about ATO anymore, and you say, well, do you care about privacy? And because they typically have a zero tolerance for the loss of PII and privacy. So that's really, I think, one of the differentiators.
And Matt, would there be a situation where something would be below the threshold? And I don't know, if do you investigate 100% but something's below the threshold and you're just like, we just need to know what's going on because this may be, the tip of an iceberg to something much, much bigger.
Yeah, I would say that there definitely are those cases where you're below the threshold. Chargeback fraud is a really good example of that. I've been in brick and mortar retail for a long time, but prior to coming to Taco Bell, and if chargeback fraud was under a certain threshold, it wasn't worth the time or the energy or the money because exactly what's going on there. It's just somebody who called up their credit card company and said, "I didn't buy that case of Red Bull. It honestly wasn't me," and you can fight it or not, but it's going to cost you a lot more to fight.
Right. Oh, so someone's just trying to get back the few dollars of a Red Bull, essentially.
Yeah. And it's all about risk, risk and reward, right? What's the risk threshold? Dan, I liked what you brought up though about PII, because the risk is obviously a whole lot higher, and people are finally in this country starting to see it that way, thanks to some regulations that are in place. I don't typically feel thankful for regulations, but in this case, I do. And in Europe, especially, if a PII breach results in 4% of global revenues as your potential fine there, that'll get everybody's attention real fast.
Indeed.
So everybody needs to pay super close attention to that. And it really has helped move the needle in terms of awareness of why should I care about protecting somebody's email? Like I always know why to care about that, but educating the business about, it's just somebody's email, or we just collect first name and last name. What do we really care about that? Putting those teeth behind it really has helped a ton.
Let me remind people that there is a link at the bottom of the screen that you can register for next week's video chat. By the way, if you click on that link, it will not take you out of this video chat at all. You'll stay in this. You'll still be able to register for the next one as well. And I know you guys can multitask because you're watching and typing at the same time and probably doing your regular work and answering a phone call and texting and looking at Facebook and LinkedIn. I know how this works. So click on that link and register for that, and stick around, by the way, for our icebreaker at the very tail end. And we have 4.5 minutes to get your votes in for the best bad ideas, because we will very soon be playing the department. No, not the Department of Yes, Beat the Bad Idea. All right, let's go to our questions again. Ooh, this one from Rick Woodward. How do we overcome the perverse incentive of devices that don't suffer negative consequences being used to perpetrate fraud attacks against other organizations that will suffer consequences? So I'm going to guess, Rick, you're referring to IoT devices, that IoT devices are often used as mechanisms. Are we talking about that? What do you think? I'm interpreting Rick's comment here, like this is again like what you said, Dan, that often the tool or the individual that's being used is not the ultimate victim.
Yeah, and it isn't just IoT. It's cloud hosting. I mean, DigitalOcean is used frequently by bad actors to launch all sorts of attacks. Joe's data center. There's actually a place called Joe's Data Center. There are some hosting providers that when we see it in our telemetry, we know it's malicious because no good traffic ever comes from those. And, we've tried, a couple of years ago, we tried reaching out to some of these organizations, and they just have no appetite at all to putting an end to it because they're making money from it. So I think it's going to take some regulation, some change in the law in order to curb their behavior, because they have no interest. Even Amazon, by the way, AWS, we see all sorts of malicious traffic launched from AWS. And,
well, not just malicious, but people like taking advantage of your instances to just run their own processing of whatever it is that they're doing. I mean,
yeah, that's not necessarily on AWS because you have an instance. It's your job, I think, to secure.
Right. It's not AWS, but I'm just saying that is an example. I mean, it's happening in the cloud, is what I'm saying. You should be controlling it. You should be managing that. That's, by the way, a good example of where does the fault, where does the security of the cloud exist? Is it you? Is it AWS? Matt, what sort of, I guess, mechanics have you seen where unwitting victims in terms of individuals or devices or cloud instances in a fraud scheme? And how do you monitor this too, for that matter?
Yeah, it's really interesting and kind of funny that you mentioned DigitalOcean specifically. They're one of the entities that's on my watch out list. When I get a SOC alert and it says that the traffic's coming in from DigitalOcean, I know right away. We actually have a list of those. A lot of the ASNs we blocked and whatever the case is, but you can't always do that, especially with IoT devices or things like that. So we track device ID and device type, because we know without a question all of our e-commerce traffic is going to come in through a mobile device or a computer, right? That's it. We don't accept, we don't yet integrate and order tacos to your baby monitor. That may be coming sooner or later. We'll get you that Skittles freeze over to your infant to sleep it down in the middle of the night. A really good idea, but we don't do that yet. So if we see something coming in with a device ID that looks weird like that, that's a high alert and a red flag for us.
Yeah.
We can't always do anything about it. I'm not reaching back out to Graco or whoever it is that makes those devices and say, hey, you guys really need to fraud proof your baby monitors, because they're just not going to. Number one, right? They're not going to take the call. We have seen cases too where we've had a large concentration of compromised bots coming from a specific regional ISP, and our network actually just shut them down. Like automatically, it came in, it tipped over an automated threshold, and no longer were we accepting things from that ISP. Well, that was actually a case where too aggressive of automated fraud detection worked against us, because we ended up blacking out some customers in a part of the country. And I got a phone call from the IT director of this regional cable company who said, hey, all of my users are complaining they can't access your website. What's going on? We had to unroll all of that. But
Yeah.
All right. Hey, just a couple of things. I just saw that Larry just accepted the position, and John, I don't know what everyone's congratulating John. Did he also? Are we talking about ProCap? I had a 3/8 start date myself. It's been moved to 3/1. So John has also accepted the position. So kudos to both Larry and John. And by the way, I'm calling an audible right now.
Hello, welcome to the Department of Yes, where no request is ever rejected.
So normally I was going to say at this moment we would play Beat the Bad Idea, but we were going to play both Beat the Bad Idea and the Department of Yes because a bad idea has come in so good for you specifically, Matt, that we're going to play the Department of Yes. And I don't know if you know this game, but I'm going to explain it to you right now, and you're about to play it. Department of Yes is, if you know that the security department has notoriously been known as the Department of No, right? Because they reject really good ideas. Well, the Department of Yes is the complete opposite of that. You have to say yes to really bad ideas. Got it? All right. So here comes a really bad idea. Now, I don't want you to be facetious. I want you to consciously think why this is a good idea and why you want to actually implement it. That's the Department of Yes. Now, note that you've got lots of security friends watching right now to see how you'll answer this question. And this is just for you, Matt. Here you go. Using Taco Bell's drive-through screen as a security engineer's extra monitor, why do you actually want to do this?
because I can crowdsource intelligence, and we have a high degree of people coming through the drive-through that can help me analyze SOC alerts.
All right. Yes! I'll accept that answer. Very good. Okay.
I am going to fail at this exercise.
No, we're not playing that game. Now we're playing this.
It's time to play Beat the Bad Idea.
All right. So here's what's going to happen. I'm going to give you one of the bad ideas that's been voted up, and you have to explain how you're going to sort of prevent this from happening. And by the way, there isn't some that are so significantly voted up. And by the way, I know two of them are being used for okay. Actually, no, this one isn't being used for our What's Worse game. Okay. Here we go. This is Beat the Bad Idea. And I'm throwing this to you, Matt. So Dan, you're not feeling confident right now, but you're going to get it. I'm going to get it. Again, Matt, I'm going to have you answer this one first. And by the way, if anyone wants to pipe up that this was their bad idea, please pipe up because I don't know who sent these in. This is the highest voted one. Accept all fraud and just write it off against your taxes. How are you going to beat this bad idea, Matt?
I mean, the first thought is you just don't pay the taxes, but that's also fraud. So I don't know if you can counter fraud with fraud. Except all
two
fraud,
wrongs don't make a right.
Yeah, I suppose so. I mean, it works in some instances. I guess you hire an army of lawyers, and you bog the process down, right? You beat the bad idea.
Then what's going to be more expensive, the army of lawyers or the taxes you're going to have to pay? My guess is the army of lawyers.
But you're still beating the fraud. You're not achieving the goal, but you're beating the fraud, David.
All right. Hooray! I'll give that to you. You make a good argument, Matt. Why are we going to do this? Or not why? How are you going to beat this? Excuse me. It's not why. I'm sorry. That's the Department of Yes question. Accept all fraud and just write it off against your taxes. How are you going to beat this? It's implement. Assume it's implemented. It's actually happening. How are you going to control it? Dan, this is you.
Oh, I was hoping if I just ignored you, Matt would speak up. No, okay. I actually did think it was Matt. So what was the question?
Dan, it is. Did I say? I might have said Matt by accident. My apologies if I did. No, the question is, so it's beat the bad idea. You're going to accept all fraud and just write it off against your taxes. So that's actually happening. So how are you going to beat this bad idea? How are you going to control it?
Well, it may be happening, but it doesn't help the consumer, right? The consumer still will suffer the inconvenience, the loss of their PII. So it is a bad idea. I don't think
Well,
anybody.
right, but you have to beat the bad idea.
But it's a bad idea.
Yeah, I know, but the game is called Beat the Bad Idea. Come on.
Right now, I'm hoping for a power outage.
All right, hold on. I'm going to force one more on you. Well, let's see. Okay, here you go. Here, beat this bad idea. This is an interesting one. Matt, throwing this to you. Partner with Reddit to mess with your stock price because with no corporate value, there is nothing for fraudsters to gain. So it's attacking the ROI, which in some way might be actually a good idea. How are you going to beat this bad idea?
This is the old GameStop trick.
Exactly.
Yeah. To pump up the stock price and then crash it. So the idea is, how do we beat it by keeping the stock price inflated after the fact?
Well, it's happening. So how are you going to sort of
Put
other mitigations in control in your environment to essentially either prevent it from happening or not let the thing they're trying to do explode at the level they want it to do?
Yeah. I mean, the best way, honestly, to go about that is through velocity monitoring, right? Mm-hmm. What's a typical trading volume for our company? What's our average trading volume? And if all of a sudden, and I'm sure that this is happening in the markets already, so they've got controls in place and circuit breakers. And I think implementing an internal circuit breaker behind that would be the way that I would go about doing that, right?
All right. I like that answer. Good answer. All right. Dan, are you ready for the challenge?
So well, David, you froze for a moment. At least
I did?
On my end. Yeah, just for a moment. I thought maybe I got my power outage.
No, you don't get it. You're going to have to now, here it is, partner with Reddit to mess with your stock price because with no corporate value, there is nothing for fraudsters to gain. How are you beating that bad idea? By the way, I'm going to say also kudos to the chat room. These are some very clever and creative bad ideas. Go ahead.
Yeah, I don't actually even know what you mean by beat the bad idea.
You think it's a great idea?
No, it's a terrible idea. But what do you mean beat it? Come up with a
well? How you? The thing is, it's obviously going to cause some serious harm. So, what are you going to do to essentially prevent the harm from exploding?
Yeah, I guess if you suddenly do have millions of people each buying $10 worth of your stock, then yeah, that's a warning sign. So yeah, I suspect there's some threshold rate limiter in place somewhere, but that's not what Shape does. That's out of my lane.
Aww. Dan, you might be a good-looking Santa Claus, but you can't beat the bad idea. We love you regardless. It's the one thing he's okay with. All right, let's move on. We got tons of questions coming in. If you haven't voted them up, please do that now. This from Oanati. Am I pronouncing your name, Oanati, correctly? I hope so. How difficult is it to quantify a return on investment in fraud departments? That is a great question. Security often struggles with this. I'm going to start with you, Dan, on this.
Well, we rely on our customers typically to tell us the losses they're encountering. I mean, we can stop the ATO from happening, but before we're in line and mitigating, when there is ATO, what is it, $300 per account? Is it $500 per account? That's something that the enterprises need to keep track of. It's not something that a vendor as an outsider has visibility into at all.
Mm-hmm. And what about you? I mean, I got to assume this is fraud's department. How much insight are you into it, Matt? And how do you sort of see the ROI on your efforts?
Yeah, it's like, how do you prove a negative, right? How do you prove the value of something that didn't happen? Certainly, you can measure historical volumes and trends, and yeah, you can monetize that, or assign a monetary average to it, like you mentioned, Dan. And over time, you can say, okay, we've reduced it by 80%, and that saved us X million number of dollars. What I really like to do instead is, I can leave that up to the fraud department, or I can leave that up to the financial department to talk about actually turning it into dollars. But what we like to talk about instead is how we have moved the needle to actual risk prevention and risk reduction. And then, of course, I've got to partner with somebody who can help me translate that risk value, whatever it is. It could be a C-, it could be a 4.8, it could be a strawberry instead of a cherry. It doesn't really matter what the values are as long as they're consistent. we've got to assign some kind of monetary value to that. And totally depends on the business model, right? And it totally is up to the financial team, the accounting team to some extent, to help you understand, well, what is the value of that? What is our average volume for an e-commerce account or an e-commerce transaction, and times length of exposure, things along those lines. So
I think what's also hard to quantify is damage to brand, right? I mean, if there's a negative headline, what does that mean for an enterprise? Is it tens of millions, hundreds of millions in losses? It's hard to quantify, but it's something that every enterprise is concerned about.
But I gotta assume, like especially an enterprise, they do know the value of the brand. I mean, heck, that's where the lawyers step in, and they if someone abuses their logo or something like that, they do say, hey, this caused X dollars of damage to us. So they must know this to some degree, or make claims to it for that matter, because they do leak, they do go after people who do abuse their brand, in a public sphere. By the way, we are now 5 minutes away from the What's Worse. I think you're going to do better on What's Worse, by the way, Dan. It's a little bit easier to play What's Worse. I have confidence you're going to do fine on that. So, by the way, Sean, be ready to come on screen in 5 minutes for just that. Let me go back to, excuse me, before I ask the questions, what was the thing about, no, I lost track of that. I'll get back to that again. But going back to our questions. All right. This one comes in. Well, this goes back to an earlier question, but it is what Phil Wolf asked. And he says, is the variety of fraud growing faster than security's ability growing to keep up? And I'm going to throw in just a question about third and fourth party fraud. Like as the fraud goes down different avenues that are once and twice removed from you, it's got to be essentially, I'm going to just say essentially impossible to track because you have no visibility in it. Matt, yes? I mean, you don't see it until it's at your front door, right?
We see it. We can see it in third party. Like you get one ring out. I think you can do that. And most companies can do that pretty well. You get 2 rings out, 3 rings out into that ecosphere. One of the problems is you're typically, not always, but very often dealing with smaller and smaller companies who don't necessarily have the power to pull their subcontractors or their partners around. So yeah, that visibility cliff drops off really sharply. And so,
I mean, is it a situation it's like too late, or it's just like you're just now seeing in a new form? Like, I don't even know how it would, like if someone defrauded a, 2 rings out situation, and then it hits your contractor and they didn't see it, you might not even see the fraud because it's been, I guess, cleaned, if you will, before it gets to your front door. I mean, there's got to be a fear of that, yes?
Oh, sure. It's the Target example, right? I mean, fraud laundering is what you're basically describing. And I just made up that term, but we're doing that all day long here. So, yeah, I mean, there certainly exists that potential, right? That somebody could sneak in through the back door. We try really hard, but we also have pretty solid contracts with all of our direct vendors. And that's where sometimes, and I hate to have to fall back to, contractual controls and legal obligations, but there are those opportunities, and that's what they're there for. So I know we're talking all about having a good partnership today with the fraud teams. It's just as important to have a really, really good relationship with your legal teams for that reason.
Something else that makes the investigation very, very complicated is when an insider is involved. That's just a game changer. And unfortunately, no enterprise wants to believe that one of their trusted employees is involved in the fraud. But when you start, you have thousands and thousands of employees, you're going to hire some criminals. That's just the nature of the business. So I think it's really important for enterprises to be open-minded to that possibility, because it happens daily. It's happening everywhere. When I was in law enforcement investigating, 90% of the time it came back to an insider.
Well, but then there's also the insider being a dupe for some malicious actor. So it can go both ways: a malicious insider and a malicious outsider using a dupe to go in, and that's where we have training. By the way, I think we should bring in, it's 45 minutes past the hour. Let's bring in Sean Bowen, if you would do me a favor and do that right now. And we will play
It's time to play What's Worse?
All right. Everyone knows here how to play What's Worse, I think. Well, I got that right. And there he is. There's Sean Bowen. He's got our 2 What's Worse scenarios. He works for a competitive company to our guest, Matt Krause. He's hold it. He put on the Burger King hat, but I can't see what hat you have on currently. What is that?
Brondo.
The Brondo.
I'm advertising Brondo today.
Okay. All right.
For those that know, they understand.
So
we'll start working on Brondo Blast, Sean.
Yes.
So to remind you, Dan and Matt, Sean is going to give you 2 bad scenarios. They both stink, but you have to explain what is the worst of the 2 scenarios. Dan, I'll make this easy for you. I'll have Matt answer first, and then you'll be able to handle this. All you have to do is pick one of the 2 that you think is worse. All right?
I'll hold the right answer up.
Sean,
set us up. I'll hold the right answer up for you so you can cheat.
All right.
All right. So what's worse on here? We have decriminalize fraud and use it as your bug bounty program, or legalize fraud, then tax it at the current tax income rate, and then send the revenue back to those who are defrauded.
Which actually sounds like a pretty good idea, to tell you the honest truth. Matt, which one's worse?
Well, the second one kind of totally reminded me of the marijuana legalization initiatives we had in California a few years back, right? That was the idea. So that's probably the better of the 2 ideas. The worst of the 2 ideas is for sure the first one.
All right. All right. So, Dan, what do you think? Which one's worse and why? Explain.
I agree with Matt.
You got to give me some reasoning. Come on.
He doesn't even know which one Matt picked.
I'm pretty sure he said the first one was worse.
Yes. The first one's worse. Why is the first one worse? Repeat again, Sean.
So I actually liked the first one. That's why I picked it. Decriminalize fraud and use it as your bug bounty program.
I said it's worse.
Well, no, but look at it this way. You think about how great your fraud prevention would be if you had a bug bounty program on your fraud.
Yeah. Whatever level of fraud they can achieve is their bounty.
That's been a great game. Just give me the failure sound, David.
You're asking for it now?
Yes.
Why do you
bring it on?
Oh. Whoops.
Thanks, guys. Good seeing you, Matt.
Thank you very much, Sean. Sean Bowen, CISO over at Restaurant Brands International. They represent Burger King, Tim Hortons, and Popeye's Chicken. All right, let's get back to our questions. We have, how much time we got left? We got about 12 minutes left. And by the way, let me do a few reminders, everybody. If you have got stories of fraud, I want to hear your stories of fraud. I'm very, very desperate for very cool, interesting stories of fraud. Anything, it could be something you read, something you heard from somebody else. Ideally, if you've experienced it or seen it firsthand, I want to hear those stories of fraud. Just email me at david@cisoseries.com. At the bottom, there is a link to register for next week's video chat. Go ahead and do that. Make sure you do that. Again, you won't be taken out of this video chat. And stick around at the end. That link at the bottom will change to our icebreaker link when we have 5 minutes left, and we will all go to the icebreaker afterwards. All right, let's get to our questions. Again, tons and tons of questions coming in. From David Zenzian, do you find fraud harder to track with backends going to K8s? I don't even know what is a K8? Excuse my ignorance. What is K8? Anyone?
I don't
Dan,
know.
Matt?
I think he's talking about Kubernetes.
Oh,
clusters.
Kubernetes. Thank you. See, I'm not as hip on the lingo sometimes. Do you find fraud harder to track with backends going to Kubernetes and having immutable envelope that auto-scale up, down, leaving minimal evidence for forensic investigation? So is essentially, I'm going to sort of modify, is Kubernetes kind of being a blocker to fraud investigations? I think is what he's asking, more or less. Dan, what do you think?
No idea. It's out of my lane.
Out of your lane, Matt?
No, I don't think it is. I mean, we do a lot of development on Kubernetes, and I think as long as you're tracking the right things, you're logging the right things, and you're paying attention to who's accessing what, and again, analyzing that sort of pattern of behavior that we talked about earlier, I don't think that that Kubernetes, I mean, it's a really technical question, so I appreciate it, but I don't think that it's really a blocker for fraud. I think that the persistence of them can be a little bit problematic because like sometimes they're ephemeral, right? They'll show up, they'll go away. So forensically, it could be difficult, but if you're logging offsite like you're supposed to be anyway, it shouldn't really be that big of a problem.
Here comes an interesting question from Mike Welch, who's the CISO over at Security Scorecard. And by the way, I will add something that I learned similar to this. If we implemented strong anti-money laundering controls and monitoring globally, what percentage of banks would go out of business as a result? What do you think, Dan?
I think quite a few of them might struggle. I do think that a lot of the banks are being used aggressively for money laundering, not unlike large shipping organizations are being used to traffic drugs. I think that they are doing they have a sincere effort at reining it in and preventing it. But wire transfer organizations are also big on money laundering, and I'm based on my interaction with them, they all seem to be making a sincere effort at preventing it. It's just it's a tough problem to solve.
By the way, I recommend the movie Cocaine Cowboys. If nobody's ever seen it, it's about how cocaine essentially caused the banking industry to flourish in Florida. It seemed like it was all financed by cocaine at that time. I should also mention that I remember I went to a J.C. Penney's and I paid for something in cash, and the woman, looked to see if it was a counterfeit bill. And I asked her, how often in one day? And by the way, I should mention my J.C. Penney's, at any given time, there is a maximum of 8 actual customers in the store, and it's massive. I don't know how they stay in business. But I asked her, how many times a day, or how often do you see a counterfeit bill? And she says, oh, all the time. I see them all the time. And she said like multiple times a day. And first of all, how rarely do we pay for anything in cash these days? It's almost always credit. But it made me realize at that moment, I must have been passing counterfeit money all the time and not realizing it. We all are, aren't we? Matt, you're not your head. You must see counterfeit bills at Taco Bell all the time, yes?
Oh, sure. And in all of the other retailers, brick and mortar retailers I've ever worked for as well. I mean, it's a big problem. And attribution of criminal intent is, to your point, David, almost impossible. We've all done it. We just didn't know that we did it. So
yeah, must have, God knows, like when she told me the number of times it goes, must have passed counterfeit bills and completely unaware of it.
Yeah, the only way to do any kind of attribution like that, and I'm not a law enforcement professional, Dan, you might have some thoughts on this, but if you can get enough data points to correlate, this person is passing fraudulent bills at 7-Eleven and at JCPenney and at Target and at whatever, then over time you could crowdsource a profile there. Trying to get all data would be tough, but
yeah, if you just ask, where did you get this bill? And they tell you, and then you say, where did you get this bill? And they tell you, and so on, and it all goes up to one person, then yeah, that is going to be difficult for that person to explain. Of course, finding the printing press is also pretty incriminating.
This question from Sandeep Campbell, and I got to assume if you have a fraud department, they know this, but he asks, how do you calculate the total cost of fraud? I mean, financial fraud, pretty obviously easy to calculate that. But when you're dealing with other frauds, I mean, I got to assume the fraud department on a quarter by quarter, year by year basis goes like, this was fraud last quarter, this is fraud this quarter, this was, like we're getting better, we're getting worse, we're putting these controls. Like, how do they know they're getting better or it's getting worse? Because like, if the volume's coming in and they're dealing with it more, maybe they're still getting better even though the amount is increased. I mean, how do they know? Matt, I'm sorry.
It's a really difficult thing to track, David. I mean, to your point, when transaction volume increases, you're always looking at percentages. So if my overall percentage of fraud is, I don't know, we'll make up something 4%. And if all of a sudden we have a really good quarter and our transaction volume doubles, but my fraud volume goes up to 16%, that's a problem, right? I don't know exactly what would be the root cause of that or anything else. We'd have to look into that, but it's always going to be on a percentage basis. And you're talking about not a specific percentage, but within a band.
What have you seen, Dan?
I've seen people struggle with quantifying the amount of fraud loss. Always, it's a very difficult number to to derive, frankly. And oftentimes it's what you learn when you discover fraud. It's something that took place 6 months ago, and you didn't know it at the time. So understanding the timing of the fraud and when it actually occurred can be a challenge as well. So not just quantifying it, but understanding it sufficiently to know when it took place is also a challenge.
All right. Well, guys, we are now at the 5-minute mark. So what that means is I want to wrap this up with a quick final question for everybody here. And this comes from Rick Woodward. We often seem to, and also to summarize, so try to answer this quickly, and then so we can summarize your best advice here. We often seem to be chasing the latest new schemes. Yes, that's true, but there's always a new clever scheme to follow after we've figured out the old ones. Is there a systemic way to prevent fraud methods that haven't been seen in a while, yet others that just trying to think of fraud schemes ourselves? So I guess is there a pattern to fraud, I think is what Rick is saying, that even if something new comes up, we can sort of identify it. Dan?
I don't think it's a predictable pattern. There is a pattern, but it reveals itself kind of retrospectively. You look back at it and you see the pattern. Anytime I've heard a so-called expert predict what fraud is going to happen the next year, it's either too vague to be useful or they're inaccurate. So I wouldn't even attempt to predict what type of fraud schemes are going to be hatched over the next year, because the fraud schemes that have been hatched over the last year are jaw-dropping to me. I guess I'm not a criminal, so I don't think that way. I don't think I can predict the next fraud scheme.
Well, we always hear think like a criminal. That will help you sort of be a better security professional. I'll ask you, have you seen any patterns, even though the new one comes along, like, oh, that follows the old one, but since it's, even though it's new, Matt?
Yeah, it's not, Dan hit it on the head. There are patterns, like criminal psychologists get into this and they understand exactly how that's going to happen. Real tough for us on the inside to say, as a criminal, how would I attack my system? Because we built the thing, right? So that's a difficult situation for us. But what we do know is that there's a pattern of normal. And we know that anything outside of that pattern of normal should be viewed with a certain amount of suspicion.
Well, that's a good way of looking at it. All right, so let's summarize. I'll have you, Dan, go first. Just a minute. Summarize your general advice on fraud, what you don't think people are thinking about and what they should be thinking about as well.
I'd say it's what I said at the beginning. Just don't think it fraud is only when there's a financial loss. There's several fraud schemes that involve multiple enterprises, and the monetization step only impacts one. If you're part of the overall scheme, then you should take an interest in preventing it. Sadly, right now, it's only the enterprise that incurs a financial loss that is left to battle that, and nobody else is helping. And I feel like if we all I know it's kind of a cliche, but if we all work more closely together, we'll have a much better shot at preventing fraud going forward, or at least reducing it.
All right, Matt, your last thoughts.
The last thoughts really are, you can reduce the incidence of fraud, but what we really have to focus on is reducing the value to the fraudster. So how do we do that?
Right.
Like, we know fraud's happening. Ultimately, the dream would be the fraudster is like, Geraldo Rivera opening Al Capone's vault, right? There's nothing there once they get to the end of this journey. You make it really expensive for them, and then there's no reward at the end. They're going to go find richer patchers because fraudsters are lazy by nature.
We all are. Don't just blame the fraudsters for their laziness. We all want a quick buck. All right. Let me quickly summarize this, and then we're going to all go to the video chat. That means all of you. We're all going to the video chat after this. So hang tight as I just wrap this sucker up. We are next Friday, Hacking Systemic Risk. If you did not click on the link, but you still want to go, just go to CISOseries.com and click the register for video chats button. We always have our upcoming video chats listed there. Do you have stories of fraud yourself? Please contact me at david@CISOseries.com. I see some messages have come in already, so thank you for that, and I will follow up with you as well. Also, stick around for our icebreaker. Click that link now at the very bottom of the screen, and you will join us. You'll have to log in with a Google account and type your full name in. It's a lot of fun. 5 meetings with 5 cyber professionals over a half hour. It's a ton of fun. All right, and another thanks again to our sponsors, F5. Thank you so much, F5, for bringing Dan, who was very entertaining. By the way, do not worry about stinking on the games, Dan. Do not worry about that. I found that cyber smarts do not come when playing the Beat the Bad Idea or What's Worse game. So don't worry about that. All right. Do you want to sponsor a video chat? Just email me at david@cisoseries.com. We have spots opening up now. I don't know. Actually, I think May might be our first date, but I think I may have one date in April right now. All right. Thank you, everybody. Whoops, here, let me close this out. We're now 8 seconds over. I've gone too long. Thank you, everyone. See it. Click the link at the bottom and join us over at the Icebreaker. And